David Attenborough, Hannah Fry, Michael Faraday, and now Chris Van Tulleken. What do all these people have in common? And no, it's not the start of a four scientists walked into a bar type joke. These four individuals have, of course, all hosted the Christmas lectures from the Royal Institution, as have many, many others over the years. 2025 marked 200 years of the Christmas lectures, and we're celebrating throughout the year by looking at the past, present, and future of science through our Discover 200 campaign. Chris Van Tulleken gave his lecture series, The Truth About Food, in December 2024, and 21 years before that, Monica Grady took us on a voyage through space and time as the 2003 Christmas lecturer. I chatted to them both about their experiences giving the lectures, how their fields are changing, and why the lectures are more important now than ever. Today, it's fantastic to have two Christmas lecturers from such different eras and areas of science. But first of all, let's go back to the beginning, before either of you had been bestowed with the great Christmas lecturer title. Monica, if we could start with you, talk me through your journey with science and how you found yourself as a space scientist with an asteroid named after you.
I'm from Leeds, which is in Yorkshire, in northern England. And growing up, I used to go out into the countryside, go walking, things like that with friends. And the countryside is beautiful there. It's gorgeous, the dales, just the hills and the valleys, just absolutely gorgeous. And I love the rocks. I love the rock forms and things like that. And so I was interested in geology. But I also was interested in the constellations in the night sky and looking at those. And I was interested in chemistry. And I sort of knew right from the start I was going to be a scientist, even before I knew what a scientist was. And then it just seemed natural to go into doing things that I was interested in, which was geology and chemistry, and then gradually some astronomy. And eventually I've ended up as a planetary scientist.
Chris, was your journey similar?
As a kid, I liked the life sciences and the physical sciences, and I was interested in nature and bugs and microbes and disgusting things. So as an adventure, I suppose, in a kind of classical big journeys, remote places way. And so a career as a tropical medicine scientist and clinician was pretty obvious. And my PhD was in molecular virology and biochemistry. So that seemed an obvious journey from my childhood. And that took me through to my early 30s, I guess. And then working in remote places, particularly in Central Africa and South Asia, I was treating a lot of children who died or were very seriously affected by infections. But the reason they were getting infections was because their parents were being marketed baby food that they couldn't afford. They didn't have the ability to make up. So they were making the baby food very dilute in filthy receptacles using filthy water. And so the proximate cause of death was a bug, but the deep cause was a social problem, a political problem, an economic problem. And so my research and at the same time, I suppose, as I was working as a clinician and starting to be a scientist, I was broadcasting for the BBC for kids. I have a very long-running show called Operation Ouch. And my broadcasting started to be more and more trying to address those deep causes of social and public health problems. So I think now, I guess my research it's very economic and it's very nutritional. And I think if you'd asked me at medical school or as a kid, if I thought I'd be interested in nutrient profiling packaged foods and looking at labeling methodologies, I'd have said I have absolutely no interest in that at all. But now that's my passion, because I think I see that as lying beneath the reasons that people then die of infections.
Speaking of kind of what you would have been thinking when you were younger, a lot of people that come here to the RI obviously know us through the Christmas lectures. Were the Christmas lectures part of your kind of scientific interest experiences growing up, both of you, or were they something you were interested and introduced to later on in life?
Well, I watched them as a kid, and the first ones I remember were with Eric Laithwaite and George Porter. And I just really, they just fascinated me. You know, the idea that these grown-ups were doing these bonkers things and experiments. It was just great. And then later on, I had a walk-on part in somebody else's Christmas lecture when I had to bring. This is when I worked at the Natural History Museum, and so I came back to the Christmas lectures then as I brought in a meteorite to show the audience, and it was So I've known about them since I was a kid.
I'd say, like Monica, a very similar journey where I watched them as a kid, and Susan Greenfield, who gave the 1994 lectures, I remember watching them, and then 2 years later, I was at medical school. 3 years later, she was one of my tutors for neuroscience. Richard Dawkins gave them in 1991, and I'm sure I would have seen them, although I then absorbed a lot of Richard Dawkins content, so I can't. Things get conflated. But definitely, the idea of the mission of those lectures, which was like burning biscuits in liquid oxygen, definitely did its thing of hooking me into science and making science accessible and fun and visual and making me curious about what was happening to the biscuit. So then I also had a walk-on part in Hugh Montgomery's lectures in 2007. I think I was edited out because we couldn't find the clip. It doesn't matter. It all worked out okay in the end. I edited out of my own. And then I've people like Kevin Fong and Alice Roberts and Helen Chersky over the last years have been great friends and collaborators. So yeah, I feel like I've been walking towards this honor for quite a long time.
So when you were both respectively approached to be the lecturer, was it because of that experience, was it an immediate no-brainer for you to say yes, or was it a bit more of a complicated graft on our side?
How did you get approached, Monica? Do you remember?
I wasn't approached. They advertised. I entered an advert, and I had to go and be interviewed.
Really?
And I had a catastrophic interview
because
the train was delayed. So I was late. I got the tube to Green Park, and I was running up Piccadilly towards the Royal Institution, and the heel of one of my shoes broke, and I had to prepare a demonstration to show that I could do a demonstration. And I'd very carefully built a Mars rover out of Lego, and it had all broken up and shattered in the back that I was carrying.
No.
It was just awful. And I hadn't had time to put any makeup on or comb my hair.
Well, you know what they say, if it's a bad rehearsal, it's a good show, right? So it must have worked.
And I was applying to do it in 2002, and Susan Greenfield rang me up and she said, well, congratulations, you did really well. But I remember her wording was, but I want to bowl you a bit of a googly. Could you do it in 2003, which was when Beagle 2 was going to be landing, and I was involved in Beagle 2. And so they wanted to have that as part of one of the lectures. So, of course, I said, yes, no worries. So I wasn't approached. I approached the RI.
I wonder how different... I'm so curious about your experience of giving the lectures, because I think I was interviewed over a very long period of time, almost going back to contributing in 2007, and then I gave a lecture at the RI earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, and then Daniel Glazer came and had a chat with me. I think it's a bit like when you're approached to join, MI5. You don't realise you're being observed for a long time, and this is
beforehand.
Yeah. And then for me, I think the RI took a bit of a risk because of the political dimension and the social dimension to the kind of science I do. Food is inescapably political. You can't talk about what people eat without immediately confronting poverty, price, taxation, government policy, industrial influence. And so I think that was probably very complicated. And at some point I'll ask Catherine and Daniel about how they arrived at that. Because then, of course, the some of the institutions that might have been interested in sponsoring lectures about food became the very companies that we would not want to sponsor lectures about food. So I think there was an added layer of complexity that one day I hope I will prize out of someone at the RI. But anyway, yeah. So I was glad I didn't. I guess my interview was I had to go and give a lecture, so that must have gone okay.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I didn't have to think about sponsorship or anything like that. As far as I'm aware, in my year, they weren't sponsored. They were made by Windmill.
Windfall.
Yeah, sorry.
They're still around. Yeah.
And they're still doing that. Yeah.
And still making it. Yeah.
Yeah. And were we on Channel 4? Yeah.
Channel 4. I think it's had a few different homes broadcasting wise.
You were on Channel 4, Monica, because I tried to get your lecture.
There's no digital copy of it. I was talking to Catherine about that. I've got a set of on video which Windfall gave me, and apparently it's something to do with the copyright and the adverts in it, and so they are going to digitize it. Because I said, well, I can get them digitized, because they're sort of not in the archive, and I was a bit upset when I found out. So
get them digitized. I want them up.
Yeah, please. I want them too. So
okay. All right.
You've got two votes. Chris, actually, just on that, and you were saying about the kind of political nature of it. I remember you saying in the third lecture that it's the first time you've kind of spoken about this topic to children. And I know the kind of politicized nature of it has made it more risky for the RI, but I think it kind of makes it even more important getting it to that younger audience.
You asked earlier, was it a no-brainer? And I think exactly like Monica, it's like, of course it's a no. Of course I'm going to do it. Maybe I don't know what your life was like in 2003. I've got two quite young daughters, and we had a baby, a third daughter in March. So and I didn't get a year run up. So I guess I was asked at the beginning of the summer, and I really was very pressed. But you cannot say no to the Christmas lectures. And it's right at the moment where I think wrongly I am the voice of this stuff in the UK. I'm the person who is critiquing the food industry most vocally. I'm probably the most prominent, totally independent commentator about this. Most of the other people who talk about food are within the industry. And so it felt like this was at the busiest time when the conversation is most active. That is the time to do these Christmas lectures. And where safer to talk to kids about science with nuance and perspective and detail than the Royal Institution, So it felt like this was the place to do it if the RI would let me, and they definitely did.
I think part of that accessibility to kids is the way that we use demos or demonstrations, but they've obviously been a huge part of our heritage throughout the Christmas lectures. Animals are a bit of a tradition. We've had a llama in the lift before. We've had all sorts. And there is no time you see more demos than in the Christmas lectures. But for both of you, was there, either from watching them previously or just from other sources of inspiration, were there any demos that you desperately wanted to make sure you could do?
What did you do, Monica? I'm really curious. I would love to have seen your lectures.
Well, I, Christopher, did 5 lectures, one of them live.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Which was an absolute nightmare.
This is the thing that I'm going to sort of lean into the computer conspiratorially here. I spoke to other previous Christmas lecturers. It's an arduous. I found it extremely hard.
Absolutely knackering.
Yeah.
Because we would record. I can't remember which way we'd do it. We'd record one in the afternoon, and then we would have a rehearsal for the next one in the evening. Or no, I can't remember what it was, but we'd do 2 in a day. a rehearsal and a recording. And so my lectures were a voyage in space and time. And it started off with the Big Bang and cosmology and the origin of the universe, and then the origin of the solar system and the planets and the origin of life. And then the idea of life coming to the earth, or the building blocks of life coming to the earth. And then it went on to, and we did the live one was all about Mars. And this was very difficult because, I mean, you said, what was 2003 like for me? Well, we have one son. He was 13, going to secondary school. So there's no worries, he's getting the bus home and all that sort of stuff. I lived just north of Milton Keynes, so I was commuting down to London every day and back again. And my husband worked at the Open University, and he was responsible for the design and build of two instruments, one which was on Rosetta, which went to a comet, and one which was on Beagle 2, which went to Mars. And so during 2003, he was busy finalising the build of the gas analysis package on Beagle 2, driving up and down the country, getting bits soldered to bits and things like that, while I was going up and down the country, being filmed outside power stations and all sorts. And it was just crazy. It was just really, really busy. And then Christmas Day was the day Beagle 2 landed. And Ian and me drove down to London, at sort of 6 a.m, leaving our son, our 13-year-old, in bed by himself, hoping, Father Christmas had come or whatever. And then to be in a studios when Beagle 2 was landed, and it didn't signal, and it was really disappointing. And we went back. And then a couple of days later, I can't remember, it might have been on the 27th or the 28th, we actually did the live programme, when we were hoping by that time we'd have heard from Beagle 2. You asked about demonstrations, and my favourite demonstration that I was determined to get on, and which I did, was about food and the building blocks of life. And I say that life is built like a cake, and you have ingredients. You have butter and sugar and flour and eggs, and they're like hydrogen and carbon and nitrogen. And, these are the building blocks, and you can have them forever, and they won't do anything unless you bring them together. So you bring those building blocks together to make molecules. But then those molecules won't do anything unless you provide them with energy. So you have to give them the right amount of energy, or they'll die. Or if you don't have enough energy, they still won't grow and compete and things like that. And I talked about stability. You can't put a cake in an oven and then open the door to see if it's cooked, because it'll go flat. So you have to have stability for the molecules to get together and all this sort of thing. So I was using making a cake as an analogy. And so I insisted on several different types of cake that we could explore.
Of course.
I'm big on cake.
We have cake. I mean, we had a lot of cake in my lectures, but I was very interested. I mean, you and I have an enormous overlap in interest, because if you discuss what eating is, you very quickly arrive at the origins of life and the very fundamental chemistry of life. So, as you will know, I mean, I quoted the 1938 Nobel laureate for medicine and physiology. Life is just an electron looking for a place to rest. So we turned kids into a hydrocarbon fuels or carbohydrate fuels, and then turn them then into high energy electrons to flow through a series of molecular pumps to pump protons that would then create ATP that would make other proteins move. So we worked pretty hard on the subatomic particle side of eating and energetic.
We had children being neutrons and protons in an atomic nucleus. We hired a cherry picker, one of the crane things, and the camera guy, he stood at the top of this while we had children all in different coloured T-shirts in a school playground, and we had two hydrogens that collided together, And then they held hands and they were a couple. And then we had 2 more of those, and they made a ring to be helium. And then we made carbon and this, that, and the other. And then we managed to get, I think we must have got 512 of them, because we had 256 on each side of the playground, and we had them run to each other and then push them back to show that you got to such a big state with an atom that you can't actually build anything bigger. You need a certain amount of energy. And so we got these huge crowds of children clashing into each other.
Trying to create new giant elements.
Yeah. Oh, it was huge fun.
When you were doing the lectures, Monica, was there anything that you had started out thinking you understood extremely well, and then by the end, having had to create a demonstration,
yes.
did you actually then understand things better? Because there are things I understood much better at the end of the lectures than I had at medical school or during my PhD, which was embarrassing in a way.
Well, you've got to find a way to teach other people, and so you've got to understand it yourself, so you've got to break it down. And for me, it was the idea of it was the expansion of the universe, and the idea that, and to be honest, I still haven't got my head around it, that there's nothing before the Big Bang. Fred Hoyle said, about the Big Bang Theory. Well, nobody knows what went bang and what was it going, banging into. And so he coined the term the Big Bang, although he never actually believed in it. And now the idea of, right, okay, well, the universe is a rubber sheet with, ripples in it, gravitational waves and all this. It's like, oh no, I'll stick to the solar system. Asteroids and meteorites are much easier. But I had to work really hard to find ways to explain this. And this was in the opening lecture.
Monica, I was going to ask you, because obviously your kind of field has changed so much in the time since you did your lectures. Even just things like the James Webb Space Telescope being launched has been a massive development in itself. But how much of the content from your lectures that you can remember do you think would no longer be the way we understand it and has actually been updated?
I think the content of the lectures stands, but in each area of the different subject areas, there has been progress. So, for instance, I have one lecture which is about sort of astrobiology and where might life be found elsewhere in the solar system, and what's the chances of finding it beyond the solar system, beyond the galaxy. And we know a lot more now about places like Europa and Enceladus, and also about Mars. We know much more about the landscapes. We know more. I mean, the whole field of the idea of planets around other stars, exoplanets, and understanding their atmospheres and being able to find out, at the time there was a holy grail, was looking for an Earth-like sun orbiting a sunlight, an Earth-like planet orbiting a sun-type star in a habitable zone. And now we know that, that concept is not quite the same as we believed it at the time. The idea of a habitable zone has changed completely. So the field has grown in so many different ways. But I think I've got the basics more or less right. I hope so anyway.
I think the lectures serve as a really nice kind of time capsule of what our understanding of each given subject was at that time, but also how our kind of technology that we have to demonstrate it has changed as well. I think a lot of the basis of a lot of demos haven't changed, because if it ain't broke, don't stop blowing up a hydrogen balloon. It works every time.
Yeah. Well, my favourite bit was letting off stink bombs in the lecture theatre when we were talking about Venus.
What's in a stink bomb?
Hydrogen sulfide.
But presumably you can't still get a stink bomb, can you? You can't buy.
Well, you certainly could. You certainly could. 21 years ago, we had 3 or 4 kids, gave them to them, and they just went around the lecture theatre and stomped on them in different places.
Can I buy a stink bomb UK?
Yeah, ask Siri.
Okay. I think their composition has changed.
But I mean, the main thing is you get the idea of stinky, which because Venus is very hot, 400 degrees, and stinky.
I think the lectures most of the ones I've seen lean quite hard on the dogma. It's hard to believe there'd be the odd little thing, but surely not. I'm trying to think of the stuff that I was teaching kids is pretty established, and children are quite up for learning. I think there's a responsibility almost to teach them the canon. If you're going to talk about gastrointestinal physiology, you better cover the enzymes and the stuff that one argues about. And I don't think we're going to rethink the electron transport chain, even if questions around origins of life may come and go. We sort of caveated all that. I'd be interesting to go and watch mine in 20 years' time and see how it's withstood. I wonder what will stand up. I'm trying to think what might not.
But I mean, as scientists, we understand that people have to know the basics. There are some facts that they have to know. It's no good having an opinion about an atom or an electron. You've got to know some basic. You've got to know their properties. You've got to know how the physics of matter affects the chemistry and the reactions that those molecules will undergo. And it's no good sort of saying, oh, well, organic chemistry, who cares about that? But it's just like you've got to know these things. You've got to understand why the carbon atom is so important and so unusual in its structure, which controls how it acts.
I would guess that point about carbon's ability to form 4 bonds is made perhaps not every year, but every year you deal with the life science. I would think it's a point I made in great detail.
I did it with balloons.
You did it. I got. We actually used a pretty straightforward molecular model, but we did then. We pointed. I mean, what you just said. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, the 4 most abundant elements in the universe. Am I right saying that?
Yeah.
Good. Also the 4 most abundant elements in the human body. So I think these are things we're not going to go and revise, are we? This is the...
No, I mean, because then you can discuss life on other worlds and you can discuss aliens and you come back to, right, okay, is the chemistry going to change? Well, there are certain fundamentals that we must, do we assume that the electron is universal, that an electron in our galaxy is the same as an electron in another galaxy, in a one that's much older? And it's like, well, yeah, we sort of think we have to assume that. And so you get the idea that, well, in that case, you can't imagine far too many extravagant chemistries. And the other thing that I remember trying to get across is the importance of the solvent and getting people to think about why water is so important because of its properties. It's a liquid for 100 degrees between melting and boiling. And there's no other liquid that has that range as a liquid.
Is that right?
Well, okay,
I'm not challenging you.
No. But think of what else you could use to dissolve things in. You can dissolve things in mercury, but that's not terribly useful. You can dissolve things in bromine. You can dissolve them in sulfuric acid or ethanol or all sorts of things.
So there are elemental liquids, I suppose, that might have I would guess.
I'm not sure what the dynamic range of mercury is. I don't know between freezing point and boiling point. But bromine, bromine's there's only the 2 elements that are liquid, bromine and mercury.
At a temperature that is,
at room temperature. Yeah. So
I love that. I knew I'd learned something today.
But mercury must freeze. Mercury must become solid because that's why they have to have alcohol in thermometers in Antarctica.
Is that right?
Possibly.
Have you changed your view on where life originated? Is it all earth chemistry, or were we seeded? Do you think we've moved that discussion on?
Oh, certainly the idea of panspermia, which is what Fred Hoyle and his chum Wickrama Singh sponsored. I don't believe that. I think that doesn't solve any problem. That just pushes it back to somewhere else where we don't know the conditions. So, I mean, I'm very happy to have the Earth seeded with molecules. I mean, we know from analysis of comets that they've got glycine in and other bits and pieces. They've got carboxylic acid. They've got all sorts of stuff in which act towards the building blocks of DNA, but not DNA itself. You know, there are complex molecules in interstellar space, but not DNA. And so you've got to have, again, this idea of the substrate and the membrane bringing these molecules together, and you've got to have somewhere, you've got to have a surface for that, you've got to have somewhere stable, and you know, okay, life is tuned to the conditions on the Earth. Whether Venus has been seeded and that there's some, you know, asbestos footed, you know, aliens roaming the surface of Venus, I don't know. Why not? I mean, and we're spending a huge amount of money and effort on looking for life on Mars, and we've just sent a spaceship off to go and look for life in Europa, and you know, it's So there's good hypotheses, and they're now you know, the evidence is being looked for to test them.
We mentioned earlier on, this year is the big 200 years of the Christmas lectures, and they were first started by Faraday because there was kind of a bit of a lack of this kind of informative but also entertaining series educating young people. Obviously, it's more of an established idea that young people need science education now, but I think that engagement, that fun side of it is a really big thing that the Christmas lectures kind of helps to serve. For both of you, has that always been something that you've tried to integrate into your work, or is it more kind of when the opportunity comes along, it's something you're keen to do?
I think because I'm lucky enough to work in a subject area which tends to interest people, you know, space. Okay, although I'm not on the astronaut end of space, I'm not on the walking on the moon end of space, but you know, I go into schools and I've run workshops on living on the moon and you know, building lunar modules and talking about life and things like that. And one of the big things I keep trying to do with kids is make them realise that actually Europe has a space agency and that not all the space stuff comes from NASA. I spent ages doing that because NASA is so good at publicity and images and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, yeah, the JWST, but Europe paid for a big wodge of that. But you know, it's NASA's JWST. But anyway, I mean, it is so important because STEM subjects are so essential in living life, and we need to build more houses, but we haven't got enough builders. Well, why haven't we got enough people who can measure and you know, surveyors and all these people who are involved in the building industry, in the catering industry? Where are all our chemists, our engineers, our technologists, our mathematicians? We haven't got enough of them, and it's like we have to get kids, we have to get more women involved because there's still that barrier. Oh, it's difficult, you know, and there is still, when you look at lots of faces at conferences, you know, it's still, I'm sorry to say, very white in a lot of things. I think it's really, really important to get the message through, and that's, and the way you can do that is to enthuse teachers as well. And to prepare materials for teachers to help them and to enthuse them. But teachers have got so much to do.
I think when I'm very interested in those reflections, Monica, because at the heart of the reason, of course, many people are unable to engage with STEM subjects is teaching them requires resources that sometimes arts and humanities, as long as you have access to some books and a pen and a piece of paper or the internet. But teaching subjects that require demonstrations, experimental equipment, and teachers with significant health and safety requirements. So the barriers, it's the same marginalized groups that are thrust out of science, and the same communities that are thrust out of science that are excluded from many other things.
Yeah.
My teaching of kids, I feel there are sort of two separate projects. One is to celebrate the pure endeavor of science and what an amazing tool it is. But I'm also involved in the critique of science, that there is a lot of modern industrial science that is brought to bear on politics and economics that is not really science. It's advanced marketing. We've seen this with tobacco, fossil fuels, alcohol, food, gambling, automotive industries. We see science being distorted. And so I feel a pressure to say to young people, science is a very, very wonderful tool. It's a somewhat limited tool. It won't tell you right or wrong. It will allow you to predict outcomes and measure the world in a fantastic way. But it's quite a neutral tool, and used carelessly or used harmfully, it can do great damage. So and that's a very difficult thing to say. So I'm starting to say that more to young people about food science. It's to point out we have a consensus, for example, that sugar-sweetened beverages are harmful. I mean, they drive weight gain and metabolic disease and tooth decay. I think no one reasonable disagrees with that. But there is a stack of academic papers that are very hard to fault if you look at them one by one, that show that soft drinks are absolutely fine. When you look at the funding, they're funded by largely companies and institutions funded by companies that make soft drinks. Yeah. So I think we've seen such progress in teaching science in the UK. It does feel important to quite early on say, in the sciences that affect health particularly, just remember that this can be done well or badly. It can be done with different purposes.
The other thing, though, coming on from that is the fake news, the anti-vaxxers, these experts, who are they? What do they know? And and we've seen this with climate change, with vaccines, and most recently with should we have been vaccinated against COVID? Should we not be vaccinated against COVID? Should we have gone into lockdown? All these that were partly political or greatly political decisions that were driven by the best medical science at the time, but the medical science had to gallop very, very quickly when we were looking for the vaccine. And I think that your statement, Chris, that we have to teach children to critique science, to understand its shortcomings, and to be able to say, right, well, actually, what is the evidence for that? You're saying that, but what is your evidence? And the other thing that I like to try and get over to children is that science hasn't finished. It's like there's still loads to do. There's still loads of unsolved problems that we just don't know enough about. So there's plenty of scientific questions still to go round. There's loads of work still to be done.
Science, I love that. Science is an approach to a problem much more than a list of facts. And I think the RI has been very good at talking about the history of experiment, about understanding the meaning of what an experiment is, about showing working. I think that's part of the lectures, in a way that quite often kids think that science is like the biggest, the tallest, the strongest. It's that sort of Guinness World Record set of facts rather than experimental methodologies. And it's bringing the methodologies to life that I think the lectures do so well. That point about vaccines is so important. And it's my life as an infectious diseases doctor, it's a huge problem that my patients many of them have I'm seeing them because they weren't vaccinated. Yeah. But I'm very sympathetic that the same reasons that leave them that leave them mistrustful of some of the vaccine science is because science has not included people like them or their communities particularly well. And so I think I hope we're starting to get beyond just shouting about the truth and the methodology and the evidence, and starting to understand we need and the RI has been brilliant about this. My words are overtaking my thoughts are overtaking each other. You made a comment about the whiteness of conferences in science, and I'm acutely aware that I am someone who speaks about problems that affect the most disadvantaged people from a position of extreme privilege. And I think what I notice the RI and lots of other great science communication institutions are doing is they are starting to show children that people like them, whoever they are, can do science. So we've got a much greater diversity of voices.
It's fascinating hearing two different experiences, and I'm sure everyone has had slightly different experiences as the Christmas lecturer. But if you could each give the next Christmas lecturer one piece of advice, what would it be?
Start earlier. I mean, I knew for a year before I was doing it that I was doing it, but I didn't start writing anything until about October. And yes, start earlier, but basically throw yourself into it and enjoy it because it's enormous fun.
I love that. Yes, put it off for a year. Whenever you're invited, just ask for another year. I'm not sure I have any advice. I think it must. If I was going to do it again, I feel like I'd have a list of lessons learned, which would be things like I need to start earlier and we got to build the demos earlier. But I just feel my experience from years of doing this kind of stuff is that it must always come down to the wire. I've never done anything quite like the lectures before, where you have the demonstration team building these things that they kind of own, and then we have the BBC, and then we've got the Royal Institution. Then you're the lecturer. It's this four-headed beast, and then you have your experts, the fifth heads or sixth heads, coming in. Often, I mean, some of my experts were like, "You get me for 10 minutes that day," so you never quite know what they're going to do. So I think maybe part of the joy of it is it will be incredibly stressful and somewhat chaotic. Is it? I mean, Lia, I never had the nerve to ask anyone for fear of the answer.
Okay.
My impression from the team is it is generally quite an intense week, at the least. Most of the lecturers are experienced scientists, they're experienced communicators. I am feeling like most of us have felt it was one of the more arduous things we've done in the best possible way.
It's terrifying every year. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Yeah. That's what I was fishing.
No, it wasn't a you thing. It's like that every year.
Lia, it's very nice to hear that. Yeah. So I don't know, no advice, but it is. It will be worth it in the end. Yeah. I wish. I don't know, Monica, if you thought this. If you go back through the history, if I just go back to like the back in the 70s and the 60s, 50s. The same names come up again and again and again.
Eric Laithwaite did it for years, and so did George Porter.
Michael Faraday did it 19 times.
Right. Oh yeah. Here, 51, 52. I mean, by 1860, he must have been really good at it. I bet it was pretty slick.
Yeah.
So I wonder
did you do a Friday evening discussion lecture?
Well, that was I think that was the most the discourse. Yeah, that was the most terrifying thing of all.
They lock you in a room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I got locked in the room.
Yeah,
I wanted another 5 minutes with my slides, but I was locked in the room.
Yeah. Well, I was so proud of myself because I could see the time. You got to do exactly 60 minutes, and the bell rings, and I could see the timer, and so I was flanneling coming up to my last slide, and I could see 15 seconds to go, and I put on I was talking about collisions, and my last slide was, and you never know, and the bell went ting. The next collision might be tonight, and I swept out.
Oh, that's lovely.
Brilliant.
What a note to end this on.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that is the perfect ending.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. That's it for this month. Thanks for tuning in. It's fair to say that whoever gives the bicentennial Christmas lectures later this year will have big shoes to fill. But we're not worried, and I'm sure you won't be either, so keep your eyes peeled. In the meantime, you can visit us to explore our free museum or attend one of our weekly science talks. Just head to rigb.org to see what we're up to.